Have you ever gotten into time tracking, Joe?
I tried it multiple times, and it seems like every time I try it, bad things happen and Joe stops.
So you just avoid it now so you don't cause something else bad to happen?
I do. I do. Correct. Yeah. Usually I end up, how's this work? Assuming you're talking about tracking where your time goes in the past, not like time blocking for the future, right?
Correct.
So
Yep.
time blocking or time tracking, the data nerd in me cannot handle it if that data is not perfect and captured very cleanly. And my experiences with time tracking are that the lines between activities are so fuzzy that it's really hard to get good data, and I get mad with the data, and then I just fine, I'm not collecting this anymore. That's my experience with time tracking. Are you going to tell me I'm wrong?
No, that's completely fair. I don't have the connection to like bad events happening because I've tracked my time, but also it's left a bad taste in my mouth because I've tried to do it manually in the past and it hasn't worked.
Sure.
But I have to admit that I have been using timing to automatically track my time for quite a while
right.
on my Mac. So I've always had that running as like a backup. And the last 6 months, I've really gotten into manual time tracking with Timery for iOS. I've actually got two screens on my iPhone, one which has a couple of widgets and the intentional apps I want to see when I first open it. And then the other screen is all Timery widgets. It shows me the time on task, the time spent by day, sorted by project, and then time spent for the week, sorted by tag, and then a bunch of saved timers, which has been really cool. I selfishly bring this up because as we record this, I made a thing, which is a combination of both the time tracking and the time blocking. So the time blocking course we launched a while back. I made a complimentary like bookend type course for time tracking for people like past me who had a negative reaction to it, didn't really know where to start. And I think it's helpful if you understand a few key concepts before you go into it. I think a lot of people make it more complicated than it needs to be. And maybe, I thought maybe that was your reaction with it. It sounds like maybe there's something deeper.
Yeah, in my case, it's
time tracking
kind of
issues,
guttural. But... Yeah, so I understand. Like, if you don't have my aversion to unclean data, is probably the way to say that. If you don't have that aversion and you're okay with like the lines being somewhat fuzzy and it not being like down to the minute correct, like if you're okay with that, I feel like it's probably fine and it can be extremely helpful. I've listened to like on Cortex, Gray and Mike talk about once a year about their time tracking adventures. And I always listen to those and think, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to do that. And I set up kind of like what you're talking about, like pulled up Timery. Let me set up all the things on the widgets. Let me get all these on here. It's going to be really nice, really cool. I'm going to get to see where all my time goes. And like a week in, I'm mad at it because it's not correct. So, so yes, if you're okay with it, I think it's great.
Timery is the thing that really made it work for me. It's changed a lot, and I think the widgets with iOS 14, like that's kind of a game changer in terms of the tools that are available. It just makes it so much simpler. And yeah, you're not going to get like perfect data. I don't really want the data to be perfect. I guess I don't really care if it's perfect. Ideally, it would be perfect, but what I want to know is, did I spend 5 hours firefighting this week? And if so, like what system was it that was broken that caused that? And what can I do to fix it? Or Otter talks about tracking deep work time. I think that's kind of jokingly, but I do that sort of thing. Like I track my writing time, my screencasting time. It's not specifically deep work, but if I'm not getting, 20 hours of writing time in a week, I'm not happy with that. And I'm thinking about what can I do schedule wise to carve out more time to do that sort of stuff. I don't know. There's a continuation of like all this stuff bouncing around in my brain with Obsidian and ideas and stuff like that. It isn't real simple for me where like, oh, I get inspired and then I write something. I'm recognizing that there is a process and really it is a equation. And if I put in more time into the process, like I get more and better output from it. And time tracking helps me intentionally start and stop those things. So I will not try to convince you to track your time again.
I'm going to be a tough sell. I really am.
But I will try to convince everybody else that I can. I feel like the effort that you put into it is worth it. And if you're interested in the course that we put together, it's simplified time management, or Simple Time Management is the name, and it's those 2 courses, and it's available at thesweetsetup.com/time. And it is discounted during launch week, which may or may not be over by the time this would get published. So live listeners are getting the hookup. But yeah, I'm really happy with how it came out. I've been working on this for a while, so just want to tell everybody about it.
Good job.
Thank you.
Time tracking. Go for it. I won't follow you. I will encourage people to try it. 100%. I totally get it. I get mad at it. So I know that about myself. So I'm better off trying to schedule it ahead of time instead of keeping track of it in post.
I view it as like time budgeting. So like time blocking is the plan. That's the budget for, I'm going to make my dollars go this far for this month. And then if you never look at what you actually spend, it's easy to go over that stuff, right? So the time tracking is how well did you stick to the plan? And then from that, you can gain some insights to make better plans for next time. But
yeah, I think like Mosquito says in the chat, like I think this makes, and maybe what he's saying is what I'm struggling with as well, is like how much benefit is there to time tracking in the details? Like high level, it makes sense. But when you get down to the details, it tends to be difficult. And every time I've tried to go down this road, I always feel like I need to make it possible to take the data and do a whole bunch of stuff with it when that's the problem. But trying to do just great big blocks and trying to do the blanket general area type time tracking to me doesn't seem to be worth it when that's probably the point that actually is worth it. So This is the conundrum of Joe's data brain. That's what this is.
So yes, I think you should think again about time tracking, Joe Bielig.
Okay.
But before we think again, we need to do a couple items of follow-up here.
Too easy.
So I had 2 things from last time, and I failed on these, I have to say. The first one was my story file. I do want to do this, and I have the folder set up in Obsidian, but that's all the work I've put into it. Like I said, I was launching a course, so I didn't really have a whole lot of extra time.
Sure.
And I just completely dropped this one. The vocabulary thing, this is something I think that's going to be ongoing. And I've been looking for like new ways to say things. I've been trying to pay attention to my speech as I am talking about things. I noticed there are a couple phrases that I use over and over again that are descriptive, but I want to expand that. So like, I guess step 1 is recognizing my limited vocabulary. And I've kind of done that. Like one thing I say specifically when I try to illustrate that I feel very strongly about something is I'll say something along the lines of, I hate it with the intensity of 1,000 suns. I need to find a different way to say that.
Nice.
So again, that one's ongoing. And, I will try not to say that specific phrase the rest of this episode, but we will see.
Do you ever have a phrase that you want to adopt, but it feels a little odd coming out of your mouth?
Most of them, to be honest.
Most of them?
Which has been my struggle with this.
When he was finished eating, this is almost every meal, and I have said it, I think, once, but it always feels weird coming out of my mouth. When I have listened to him say it, when I heard him say it a lot. But whenever he was finished eating, if someone asked him if he wanted something else, like, you want some more chicken? He would always say, no thanks, I've had a delicate sufficiency. If I had another bite, I'd be sure to bust. He said it all the time. And I've always thought, I love that. I want to adopt that. I've said it, I think, once or maybe twice, and it just feels weird. It's a bit too long to say I'm full. Like, so yes, phrases.
All right. Shall we think again?
Sure. This one's, the title on this one's just too easy for that.
I know. This is a great title. Well played, Adam Grant. This is Think Again by the aforementioned Adam Grant. We have heard of Adam Grant previously in many books. I think I first came upon him when he was mentioned maybe in Deep Work by Cal Newport, based off of his work from his previous book, which was Originals, which we have not read. But this one was recommended by Awful Otter in the chat, so thank you for the recommendation. And I picked this one partly because I thought the topic was pretty fascinating, partly because I couldn't believe we hadn't read anything by Adam Grant when he keeps coming up over and over again. Probably Mihaly is the other one that happens a little bit more, but Adam Grant is like right up there, him and Cal, right, and probably a handful of others. So, yeah, this is the newest book by Adam Grant, and it is split into really 4 different parts, 3 main ones, and then a conclusion. Part 1 is individual rethinking. Part 2 is interpersonal rethinking. Part 3 is collective rethinking. And I did not know really what to expect with Adam Grant's style going into this. I want to ask you before I share mine, what was your impression of this book as you started it?
It's a little odd, I thought at first. He has a, how do I say this? He has a little bit of different way of telling stories, I guess. In a good way. I wasn't expecting it, but he has kind of a way of telling a story and trying to get the point across within the story, like trying to do the dialogue about it within it at the same time. I don't know if you picked up on this, but he tries to weave those 2 things into one cohesive bank of paragraphs. And I appreciate that, but I wasn't expecting it. And it took me a little bit to adjust to that, partially because it's so standard for people to tell a story and then unpack it, that whenever somebody starts unpacking it mid-story, it just seemed a little different. I kind of like it. I wish more people would do that, but it wasn't what I expected.
Yeah, so you brought up the thing that I thought was kind of odd about this book, because he feels like a decent storyteller, but towards the end of the book, I realized that at the beginning of the chapters, normally the stories, I capture every single one of those from my MindNode file, and there were several chapters in a row where I'm like, well, that really wasn't substantial enough to put in the MindNode file, because I don't want to just capture everything he says. And I was like, that's weird, because I was just thinking about how stories are so important, and I don't have anything really to nitpick with the way that he's telling these stories, but they're not landing like a lot of the books that we have read.
Right.
And I think the way you articulate it, where he's kind of unpacking it as he's telling it, that is probably exactly what's going on here. He just jumps right into the meat of what he's trying to communicate in these chapters. And I will say, I think he is an excellent communicator. You could argue, I guess, about whether his approach is better than just like tell the story and then talk about what's in it. But his approach does feel more researched, I guess. Like it takes greater skill to just leave off in the middle of those stories and flow into the content without it feeling jarring. And we're kind of used to that because there's distinctions between like, here's where the story ends and here's where the concepts start. And you really don't have that with this particular book, but I actually found it kind of refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing people do pretty common. We do it here on the show too, right? Where we're going to tell a story. I'll tell you a story about something my grandfather used to say, right? And when I'm done, then I debrief it, right? So then I'm taking you through like what my thoughts are on it, how it applies to what we're talking about. That's a very regular cadence in normal conversation. People do it when they're giving talks all the time. I have a talk at our church this Sunday, 2 days. I should probably finish writing it. And whenever I give those, it's pretty common for me to do the same thing, right? You have something you're going to share that is the story, and then you pick it apart and show the different pieces of it and how it applies to whatever your topic is. The thing with that is, though, when you tell stories like that and then you unpack them, you can pretty much pick out any detail you want and get the ideas or the concepts or the points that you're wanting to get across. You can pretty much pull whatever you want from a story. Like if you really try, you can get just about any idea from just about any story. I mean, it's just the way it works, right? To do what Adam Grant did here, like you're saying, is a little more polished, and it's not as simple, which means this book is not one that someone could sit down and write over the period of 2 or 3 months, I don't think.
Right.
Some of the books that we've read are. They're ones that people have, they've collected ideas in Obsidian for the last 4 years, and they're just going to grab all the things out of it and bust a book out in 2 or 3 months, right? That's a thing that people do pretty regularly. And I would probably argue that most of the books we read are like that, where someone's been thinking about something for a long time and they're just going to write the book very quickly. This isn't like that, I don't think. Just the way it's structured and the way he puts these things together, like the ideas within the stories, and then weaves it all together, that is not a simple thing to do. It's like if I'm trying to tell a story and tell you what it means at the same time, you have to maintain like 2 to 3 different ideas in your brain as you're telling it in order to do that. That's a difficult skill to pick up. And like when you hear people do that, they're more engaging stories, right? But not many people can do that. It's not an easy thing to pick up.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm not alone then in recognizing that. I think let's jump into the content here, because there's some really great stuff in here, and this could be a long episode. I've broken it down in the outline into 3 different parts, and I think we'll just try to tackle those as opposed to going chapter by chapter, although there's a really clear idea, I feel like, in each one of these chapters that you could unpack. I want to talk about the first one. Chapter 1 is, well, actually part 1 is individual rethinking. So this is about training yourself to think differently about things. And chapter 1 is a preacher, a prosecutor, a politician, and a scientist walk into your mind. This is kind of setting the tone right at the beginning that this isn't really what I thought it was going to be. I knew Adam Grant was a researcher and expected a very academic book. And so to basically lead into it with a joke, it's very whimsical, kind of fun.
Very witty.
Yeah. You could use that term. No banter here, though. The other thing, though, is it's not just to mix things up or get your attention. It's a really solid point that he's making in this chapter. So just to define these real quickly, he says that as we think and talk, we often slip into the mindset of these 3 groups: preachers, prosecutors, and politicians. Preachers, that's when we tend to defend our sacred beliefs. Prosecutors, when we try to poke holes in others' beliefs. And politicians, when we want to win over an audience. Those 3 things, I think that maps perfectly with the previous book on the art of witty banter. And maybe the thing he defines next is much better, a much better way of articulating why I didn't really like it, because he's basically saying those are all the wrong way to do this. Really what you want to do is you want to think like a scientist, and a scientist is not trying to get their way. They're not trying to influence someone and change their mind about someone. They are trying to change their own mind and make sure that they are understanding the truth, the way things really are. So that's what scientists do, he says, is they try to find the truth, they run experiments, they test hypotheses. And he makes the argument that these belong in our lives as much as in the lab.
Yeah, I think one of the fears with this is that if you have a scientist who has a preconceived bias and is looking for proof for it, right?
Yep.
Which then can put you into, say, the prosecutor stance or the politician stance. It can put you in those with the name of science behind it. That's the fear, right?
Yep.
But I like this. I like these different ways that we come at things, right? So if I have a belief and I'm solid on it, but I am not willing to second guess it or rethink it, it puts you in the preacher category. And there's a belief that I hold, which there are these that, we all have to some degree or another. But if you have that belief and you're not willing to at least consider it as potentially false, or that something can contradict it, that's when you're in that category. But I think you can move into that scientist role if you're willing to objectively step back from that belief and reevaluate it, right? This is as Christians, we see this sort of thing a lot, probably. So I think that, there's a lot of people that I've had some pretty deep religious conversations with, and I'm okay with someone challenging my beliefs. I've studied enough of like the science behind what I believe that I feel like I have a pretty good grasp, and I haven't run across anyone that can disprove it. So here we are, right? But you have to be willing to objectively look at it that way, I think.
Yep.
And that's what he's getting at here.
Yeah. This is the definition we would all like to apply to ourselves, right? Is that we're open-minded and we're willing to change our minds. I think you can locate yourself based on your actions with this kind of thing. I was talking to Chris Bailey the other day, and he said that when he presents at like these events, he'll watch the other speakers as they're watching him, or watching, like, he'll be in the room watching somebody else present, and he'll look at like the other speakers who are presenting, and they fall into two groups. There's the people in the back of the room who are like arms crossed, pointing out as the person is speaking, like all the ways that they disagree with them and all the reasons why they're wrong. And then there are the people who are in the front row, and they're like eyes are wide open, and they're just like jotting everything down that they can. Those are the people who really want to learn. Those are the scientists. I guess the people in the back, if I had to pick one of these, they would be prosecutors.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be a prosecutor. I think there are times for all of these different roles, going back to like the art of witty banter and why it's not necessarily bad. But my default mode of operation, I definitely want to be the scientist. I want to look at things and understand things for the way that they are. And he talks about this rethinking cycle versus the overconfidence cycle. This was really helpful. I feel like when you fall into one of these two, then it's easy to just stay there. Like there's some momentum that keeps you going in that direction. The rethinking cycle, you start from a place of humility, believing that you don't know it all, and you start to doubt the things that you do know. You become curious, and so you seek out the other opinions, the other perspectives. That's really what we're doing when we read all these books. We don't explicitly say this every time, but I think it's true that we go into these books open-minded enough to at least entertain the possibility that what we had previously known about whatever topic this book is talking about could be wrong. Now, maybe we fall into a bias where we try to pick books. This could be, and I don't think we do this consciously, but you could make the argument that subconsciously we tend to pick the books that we know are going to agree with our perspective. But I feel like we've read enough books at this point that we've got a pretty broad spectrum of ideas and people who have written these and where they're coming from. And then the result of that curiosity is ultimately discovery, which then you've gotten something good out of this cycle, so it keeps going. The overconfidence cycle, though, assumes that you know the truth and you're threatened by everything that comes against it. So you've got pride, which leads to conviction, and that's when you're gonna poke holes or try to change people's minds. Confirmation and desirability biases, we learned about these. Which one was this? The Art of Thinking Clearly, I think, is where we first heard about all those different biases.
I think so, yeah.
Essentially what this is confirmation bias. You have an idea and you're looking for all the ways that it's right. And you were talking about the data nerd in you. This is probably one of the reasons why you don't like the data, because you know how easy this is to do.
Easy to manipulate.
Yeah. And then the desirability bias, this is you're seeing what you want to see, and then you use that as validation of something that isn't right there. Awful Otter is saying, Mike is saying he needs to read Amanda Palmer's book again. No, I am not. Although if you go back and look at the ratings, I gave it a higher. I remember when we did episode 100, you were surprised at the rating that I had given it, because we talking about it and I bashed it a lot because I have disagreed with that book, and I'm moving on to the next contrary opinion. Thank you, Otter. But I feel like I did do a decent job, probably not a perfect job, but a decent job of trying to get something good out of that book.
Trying. Yes.
Trying.
There are a lot of biases that go into like how we pick these books, right? But at the same time, this is why we alternate, you and me, like picking these books. I tend to be a little more adventurous, I think. And Mike is forced in. Like whenever I ask Mike, what did you think about this before you started reading? He's like, I don't know. I didn't. It's your book. I just figure I have to deal with it and get through it. Like that's that's how. And like sometimes Mike picks a book and like, why are we reading this? Like I don't understand. And it's something I argue with the whole time through. But then you love it. Like this, the stuff goes back and forth, right? This is some of I think
happen. Yep.
The nice part of the way that this works because it forces both of us to be pushed outside of kind of our normal, what we would choose, and then you get a little bit different perspective on our own beliefs, and it forces you to have the conversation at least about why you believe what you do, why you think the way you do, and then you kind of have to defend it, right? Like whenever we have our back and forth here on Bookworm, we have to defend what we think of it, right? That's how we end up having these conversations, and when you do that, it's kind of like a live think again scenario, right? So I have to evaluate my own viewpoints and justify them to you, or argue with the author or support the author, right? Like these are what we do as we go through this, which is the nice part. Like that means we have practice at doing this, right? So maybe we're better at this than some. I don't know. I can hope.
I think probably if you were to engage in a conversation like this about ideas, I think it kind of on a regular basis, that's naturally going to refine the way that you think about things. And if you went into it every single time with the perspective of I'm just going to defend what I currently believe, this would not be fun at all. This would be really stressful because you're just being attacked the whole time, not just one episode, like last episode.
I would never attack you, Mike.
Just kidding.
Never. I would never attack you.
Right.
Multiple times.
It's also interesting to me how like you can slip in and out of these things. So the very first story he told is Mike Lazaridis. I don't know if I said that right. The guy who invented the BlackBerry. He had BlackBerry had nearly half the smartphone market in 2009, but it had dropped to less than 1% by 2014. And when Adam told his story, basically he was saying he was thinking like a scientist, and then they had some success, and then he started clinging to those beliefs that they had about, oh, well, people want a keyboard, and you don't want to do web on mobile, you just want email. And obviously we know how that turned out. And that was kind of interesting because we've heard that story before, specifically about the iPhone launch and how it completely turned everything on its head in terms of the mobile phone and how people used them, and BlackBerry's demise because they were unwilling to change, or they tried to change too late. I think we first heard about that in Innovator's Dilemma or something similar, and then we applied that example there for sure. Steve Jobs comes up all the time. Apple comes up all the time. So, but that was kind of interesting. It made it more personal because I've heard that story before, and you can view it through the lens of like, I know what happened to BlackBerry, the company, but when you view it as like this person who had this great idea because they were challenging the status quo and the norms about different ideas, and then they got comfortable with their own idea, it just kind of shows that, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah, and it's a factor of scale too, right? So you have your idea, it is successful. The idea was successful because you challenged the way things were working as it was, but then that thing had to be scaled in order to fulfill the needs of the market. And by doing so, they kind of fall into a rut of delivering to that one small piece of the market. And the market keeps moving. They're kind of fixed on that one point in time, but the market keeps moving on them. And that's fine. But as they've grown to get to a point where they can scale and fill that need, they lose their agility and their ability to maneuver and pay attention to the nuances in the market and continue to adapt. And the next thing you know, Apple comes around with the iPhone and destroys BlackBerry's whole market. So,
yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be like a big company, obviously that's the whole framing of this section, is that this is individual rethinking, but it does kind of show you how high the stakes can be. You know, how rethinking can completely change your world for the positive, and also failing to rethink can change it for the negative.
Right.
Let's go to the next chapter, the armchair quarterback and the imposter. I like these two. The imposter syndrome, that is something I have dealt with in the past, and I never really had a clear formula for this before, but Adam Grant helped me out a lot. He says that imposter syndrome is when your competence is higher than your confidence. And the armchair quarterback syndrome is the opposite. It is when your confidence is greater than your competence. So armchair quarterback, this is like the guy who played football in high school thinking that they could be a better quarterback than Tom Brady because he missed the guy that was open and he happened to see it on TV. Right. And the imposter syndrome, I feel like this is something that anybody who does anything publicly deals with at some point. And I guess the way to boost this, the way to fix this, is to develop more confidence. And as I read this, kind of what stands out to me is that the way to develop more confidence, put in more reps, going back to the practice by Seth Godin, like ship every day. If you do that enough times, you'll feel confident in your competence. And so this will kind of even out. I feel like this is kind of what has happened with me in podcasting. I was terrified of podcasting when I started. In fact, I joined Toastmasters because we had just started Bookworm and I was unhappy with the way I sounded in the recordings, and I would edit the heck out of them, and I couldn't get it to sound any better. So many ahs, so many ums, so many rambling thoughts. I still do that sometimes. I know it's not perfect, but if you go back and listen to those early episodes, man, I can't do it. I'm just so bad. They are. And then, the productivity show back when I was doing that and focused. And I feel like now I've got enough reps where sitting down to record a podcast does not make it hard for me to breathe anymore. Like it's still, I still feel a little bit of the pressure is not the right word. Stress isn't the right word, but like you never really lose that feeling in the pit of your stomach when you are going to like get up and give a speech. You just learn that it's really not that big a deal and you'll be able to get through it. So it doesn't cause all the alarm bells to go off in your head when you feel that sort of thing. And so several hundred reps in, I feel like I kind of have smoothed that out a little bit.
It seems like whenever you start podcasting or giving talks in person or anything that involves you speaking words to other people, it seems like there's a period that you have to go through at the beginning where you get super nervous ahead of time because you feel like you have to say all the right words in the right order and tell the right stories in the right way. You have to be so on to get it dialed in. And then over time, you figure out the tricks and the steps to cover when you did something wrong or to fill things when you're not quite sure what to say or your story didn't quite go where you thought it was going to go. Like you figure out how to handle those, which means that whenever you hit the record button and you're ready to start talking and you're going to be talking for 2 hours or more in some cases, it's not as big a deal. I don't want to seem like each episode of Bookworm isn't a big deal, because it is. But at the same time, you learn how to navigate all those things very quickly on your feet.
Yeah.
And the only way to really do that is through putting in the reps, as you're calling it, getting the experience. I don't know how many episodes of podcasts I've recorded. You've, of course, recorded significantly more than I have. But you build it up over time, right? And you figure out how to handle the nuances of talking and rambling like we do sometimes.
It's cool. Michael fix it in post.
Yeah, it's true. I ramble and figure Michael fix it.
No, most of the time I cut my stuff, but actually the more we do it, that's kind of the thing that opened my eyes to it, is that we get done, in let's say our recording time is like an hour and 48 minutes. And we think like, well, we'll cut that down. It'll probably be closer to an hour and a half. That's our target, right? But as I'm going through and I'm doing the edit, I'm not like trying to hit an hour 30 exactly. So over time, like the amount of stuff that I've cut has gotten significantly less. And so it really only ends up being a couple of minutes that gets shaved.
Yeah.
Because the conversation is decent. That's a point I want to get to in a little bit here. But before we move on from the armchair quarterback and the imposter syndrome, I feel like the imposter syndrome specifically can be seen in this graph of Mount Stupid that he has, which is pretty great. So Mount Stupid is basically like you get to the top of this little dip and you feel like, I'm at the top of the mountain and I can see everything and I know everything. And that is the point where you realize, if you have the mind open enough to understand everything that you don't know. And so you go up in terms of your willingness to talk about this topic, and then it goes way, way down because you're like, okay, I guess I don't have nearly as much expertise in this area as I thought, and people should go listen to this other guy instead. And then over time, eventually that goes, that ends up trending upwards again, and you get, obviously a lot further in terms of your ability to speak about your expertise in that particular topic. But getting to the top and realizing that you don't know everything, that I feel like that's enough to knock some people on their butt and they don't ever recover from it. It's like you put in the work to become a quote unquote expert, and then you realize you're not an expert, and then you have an identity crisis and you never really recover from it. You just walk away from it and try to do something else. It's kind of where growth versus fixed mindset comes in my opinion.
The more I learn, the less I know. That whole thing. It's like as you're going up the mountain, right? So you get to the peak and you're like, oh, I know almost everything about this. Like you can see the peak right in front of you and I know all the things about this. And then you realize that peak isn't actually the peak. There's just a little dip on the other side, and then it continues going up after that. It's like, oh, I thought I almost knew everything there was to know about this, and I know 1/10 of it, maybe.
This is why goals suck. Because the goal is the top of Mount Stupid, and you get there and you're like, yes, I have arrived. Oh, never mind. The finish line just moved on you. The other cool thing, well, real quickly, chapter 3 is talking about the joy of being wrong and talking about detaching the present from the past and the opinions from the identity. I think that's really important, and I feel like we do a pretty good job of that. This is another form of this, I guess, would be like, I have experience working with family, and I have learned to be very careful because I can separate work from family, and when we're working, put on the work hat, and when we're done working, put on the family hat, but I know not everybody can do that. So I've got to be really careful to protect the relationships there. But the one that I really want to talk about here, because you mentioned the discourse that we have in the back and forth and the differing opinions, is chapter 4, The Good Fight Club. Bookworm is the Good Fight Club. We're basically the Wright brothers.
Especially whenever I just decide to pick on Mike for no real reason other than it just seemed fun that day. Like,
yeah.
He still tolerates me, I think, and still loves me somewhat, but
no, it's all good. The Wright brothers specifically, like everybody knows the story of the Wright brothers inventing the airplane, probably Kitty Hawk, right? But this makes it way more personal because he talks about how the Wright brothers typically would fight, like they'd be shouting at each other to defend like their ideas for the propeller and things like that. But what's really interesting about this is that as vehemently as they would defend their beliefs, they'd go home, they'd sleep on it, they'd come to work the next day without any resentment, without any offense. They were able to put, what happened yesterday behind them, and frequently they would come back and they'd be like, no, your idea was better. No, your idea was better. Like they had changed their minds.
Both, and now they're like fighting again, just on opposite sides of the fence.
I think that's the ideal version of this. What's that saying? Like, strong convictions lightly held, something like that. Strong
Yeah.
opinions lightly held. Like, be willing to defend your opinions. Yeah, have the discourse about it. You got to go into that, though, with the underlying assumption that we're going to be debating and judging the ideas, not the person. If I went into these podcast recordings like, oh, I hope Joe doesn't say anything negative about any of my ideas, because if he does, I'm going to take that as an attack on my personal character, then we're probably not doing this podcast very long, and vice versa. You have to be able to separate those two if you really want to think again, learn from what you don't know and be curious. Which the more I studied this topic as we read this book, and just cements like my desire to be a lifelong learner, the growth mindset. We talk about mindset, Carol Dweck, one of my favorite books. I get it that some people aren't there yet, but the more that I understand about this, the more I realize if you're going to live like that fixed mindset lifestyle, what a miserable existence.
Yeah.
I don't want to be there.
I'm with you. I think there's a lot to be said for constructive conflict, but it's not everyone that you can have that with, right?
Yep, that's true.
You and I have, I don't think I would call them fights, but strong debates here on Bookworm occasionally.
It's true.
More often lately than normal. That might be my fault. And it seems like whenever we do that, it's pretty common after we do things like that Mike or I will text the other one and say, I was kind of rough on you. You okay? Like, we do that, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like if you have someone that you can do that with, and you both know that the ideas can change and that the ideas don't dictate who they are necessarily. Like, they might be a part of who you are, but it can morph over time, right? If you know that and you don't take things personal, like if you don't like my idea, you don't like me. No, that's not the case at all. It's okay that I don't like your idea and that we disagree on something. We can still be friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take it, go down the politics route, right? In today's culture, if you're blue or red, you can't like blue or red. Like, you can't like the other side. For whatever reason, we've decided that you can't have cordial conversations with somebody on the other side of the aisle. I have no idea why that is. It doesn't make sense to me, because I don't think that it's possible for us to truly dislike every little tiny detail about someone purely because of a political stance on, like, which party they ascribe to. Because the people I've talked to, it doesn't seem like anyone loves absolutely every aspect of the party they support, right?
Yeah.
Which means everything is up for conversation. And I would like to understand where you're coming from. If we don't agree, that's fine. We can still be friends. But not a lot of people are willing to do that today. As they say in the chat, This is why I'm purple. Like, this is but this is something that I feel like could be helpful given the political climate that we're in, right? If you could
totally
find ways to have these fights, quote unquote fights, in a good way, and be willing to think again on your own opinions, like, that's okay. And everybody's better time it's all said and done.
Yeah. All right, that's it. We got to read Leaders Eat Last. Someone needs to go vote for that on the Bookworm Club. Everyone listening live, go do it right now. So we have a justification to pick it because it's an older book, but it speaks to this exact thing. It's come up over and over and over again.
It's true.
Yeah. I won't revisit, my opinion on that, which was largely shaped by that book, but you're absolutely right. I will respond to the thing about, picking on each other. I agree. The place where I feel the worst about it, because I feel like with Bookworm, we signed up for it, right?
Yes.
But when I show up in your live streams and start challenging stuff, that's where I was like, did I go too far?
No. Good luck going too far on that one. So
yeah.
Those are fun. It's one of these things that I enjoy, like, if someone's willing to engage me on something, like, you have an opinion. Let's take, one of the fun ones I thought was whenever we were having this back and forth about whether or not you should be using terms like PKM versus just a notes database, right? And
Yep.
Opinions can change on that over time, but I had a fairly strong opinion on it.
Yes, you did.
Mike had a fairly strong opinion on it on the opposite side, right?
Yep.
And the thing that I find is very fun is, like, if someone's willing to form ideas and form an argument that directly contradicts what I have a viewpoint on, but I can formulate my side of it as well, and we're willing to have this back and forth, to me, those are fun. But I know that Mike is fine if I razz him, and I know that we're going to be fine when that's over with. Like, we've done this long enough that we know each other well enough to know I can give Mike a hard time. He can give me a hard time. We can argue till the sun sets, and we'll be fine on the other side of the fight. But I think those are fun. So I don't think that you go too far. You're fine.
Okay, cool. That kind of is a good spot to go into the next part. Part 2 is interpersonal rethinking. And this is interpersonal, so this is involving other people. And the first chapter in this section, chapter 5, is called Dances with Foes, which is kind of a weird chapter title. But the main point here is that a good debate is more like a dance than a war. That sounds kind of weird to say it, but in a war, Adam Grant says you are trying to gain ground, but in negotiation, you are you're disarming your opponent by agreeing with them. So you're not trying to like steamroll them and take something. And that's why like there's a give and take here. I think this was the chapter where the person was debating the computer and kind of disarmed it because he kept agreeing with the spirit of the point that the computer was making, and then eventually the computer couldn't do that sort of thing too, and so he won over the audience to his side. But I think that most of us, I'll just speak for myself, I can learn from this because I have definitely fallen into the category of what he describes as a logic bully, which is someone who overwhelms with rational arguments. And the problem with this is that people's minds are not changed by the presentation of facts. This does not cause them to change their minds. It actually causes them to dig in their heels, even though they don't have the ability or the facts to argue back. And I never really thought of it that way. And I would like to think that, I've come a long way in this over the last couple of years, but I do think I need to take this a step further.
I want to go back to your point about a dance versus a war. Because think about, at least in the US, political debates, whenever they're arguing, because it's total full-on argument, right? Of one side versus the other, we cut each other off, we're rude to each other, we're all sorts of stuff whenever like the people who are doing these debates, like that's what they do. Slandering each other constantly. It's like, you're not debating the topic.
Yeah, my 11-year-old was watching the last presidential debate, and at one point, we watched it for like 2 minutes, and he's just like staring at the TV like,
yeah,
these are adults? And then eventually he's like, girls, you're both pretty, and he walks away.
I love it. But that's true, right? Even our kids pick up on it. We don't, if you want to have a cordial debate and you want to influence someone, if you're trying to, I don't want to say put my opinion on someone else, but share an opinion with the hope that someone else will adopt said opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm trying to do that, slandering that person and cutting them off and interrupting repeatedly is not the way to do that. Thus the dance. So you're able to have the back and forth, listen to what the other person's saying, maybe you're agreeing with them, maybe you're not. But if you are agreeing with them, at least the spirit of what they're saying, like, I may not believe in a certain law, but I love the spirit of the law, and that's fine. I just think the way that they're going about trying to do that thing is wrong. That happens a lot, and that's fine. But trying to have those debates in a cordial way is very challenging today.
Yeah, the political debates is kind of an interesting thing because you're not trying to reach a consensus, and really it's a performance for the people who aren't even in the room, right? You're trying to sway the opinion of all the people who haven't made up their minds about who they're going to vote for. I wonder if that's at the heart of some of this, is kind of to your earlier point, we don't view the other person as a human. They're just an obstacle in the way to me showing strength and wisdom, the fact that I have mastered all these issues and I can lead the country in a specified direction. And it's easy to see how we got there, and it's easy to see why that is the way the default mode of operation now. And you can argue that a recent presidential candidate made it worse, but it's always, as long as I can remember, like, I've never wanted to watch those debates because all they're doing is yelling at each other and criticizing each other. And you get so many people saying, oh, you did this. No, I didn't. That you walk out of there and you're just kind of like dumbfounded. Like, you don't know what was true, what wasn't. You got to go back and fact check the entire thing in order to understand like what really happened. So what do? You just kind of go with your gut, like, whose personality did I resonate with more, right? So it's easy to say like, well, what if we just viewed the other person as a human and treated them the way that we wanted them to be treated? But what would it take for someone in the political arena to start doing that? Is the system so established that no one would be willing to try that? Or would you not even rise to that level where you would get a big enough audience in order for that to be displayed on like a large scale? I don't know. I kind of am wondering, like, if you got to play the game and then you get so used to playing the game that like it's not even an option, or is it just as simple as someone being like, hey, you know what? You're right. We've kind of turned into us versus them, and I'm not going to do that anymore.
I don't know that. Like, if you think of human psychology, we're drawn to negative things versus positive things. So we're wired for watching out for danger. So we notice when things are negative immediately, whereas if it's positive, it has to build over time. Like, you could show me a news story of something extremely positive, but it's not going to have near the impact of something much less dramatic, but it's negative, right? So we're drawn to this negative side. And in the world of politics, they need more people drawn to them. Thus, they can get the votes, get their paychecks, keep their jobs. And what that means is, in today's climate, because of the media being something that's easy to get to a lot of people very quickly, if it's something negative, they get more attention. I mean, look at everything Trump did. A lot of what he had for his campaign, he played games to make things negative, and that actually drew a lot of people to him, right? And as time has gone on, we've done that more and more. Your question around, like, if someone tried to step away from that, what would happen? I don't know. I feel like it wouldn't be successful. I feel like and maybe there are people doing this, we just don't know about it because they're not going to get the attention. They're not going to get the airtime. And if they happened to be on the stage, say for a presidential debate, and they were able to call out the slander and stuff and try to have a cordial debate, to do a dance instead of the war, probably not going to get very far, would be my guess, just because we're not drawn to that. And although the intellectuals will applaud them, and people who want to have a little more cordialness between the two sides of the aisle might be all on board, but I just don't see how that could take off. Like, it would take a lot of people, I think, to have that same mindset shift all at the same time.
No, I think you're right. And the reason I asked that is that I read an article yesterday about Joe Manchin, the Democratic governor or Democratic senator from West Virginia. The Senate in the U.S. is evenly divided, 50-50, but there's a Democratic president, Democratic vice president. So vice president casts the tie-breaking vote in the whenever there's a tie. So essentially, Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, which that's always a political party's dream, right? We own all three of these. We can pass whatever the heck we want. But Joe Manchin is on record as saying the insurrection that happened on January 6th, he's like, that really changed me. And he's the one who provides the majority, right? And he's saying, well, actually, we all have to work together. So you can't just count on my vote. And everybody's kind of freaking out about it. So I think this is really interesting because there is one person who is standing up and saying, hey, we got to work together. And I think that's the first step to humanizing the other side. And it'll be interesting to see if more people follow suit or if he's gone in 6 months and somebody else takes his place and it's business as usual.
Right. I think there's a lot to be said for, and we don't need to keep belaboring politics here, but there's a lot to be said for situations where you are forced to spend time with people who disagree with you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value in that. It helps you to build empathy for folks who disagree with you. And it can oftentimes lead to compromise whenever you hit a roadblock. And
right.
Currently, the way our political system is set up, the people who are in the House and Senate and doing the voting don't have to live near the people that they're arguing against.
Yep. Leaders eat last.
So
exactly.
If it wasn't possible for them to always leave and they had to do the school functions with everyone in DC, if they had to, do all the events together at all times and they had to do all the social stuff together, not just retreat home when they're not voting.
Yep, exactly.
I feel like that could change a lot of things, but I don't remember who I've talked to somebody about this pretty regularly. I can't place who it was, but anyway.
No, the conversations are the critical part, and not just the conversations like the debate, trying to convince somebody, but trying to understand somebody. Let's move on from politics and talk about something less dangerous like racism, shall we?
Sure. It's way less dangerous.
Because he tells the story here. I think it was chapter 6, but there was a jazz musician, if I'm remembering the story correctly. And it wasn't a big deal when I was reading the book, but as we're talking about this is what comes to mind. An African-American musician who was performing, and one of the, I don't remember the titles, like I avoid everything KKK, but the head honcho basically of the local KKK was there at the bar watching him play and walks up to him afterwards and he's all confused and basically says like, I have never known a black man like you. And then they have a conversation about it and they continue the conversation and they basically become friends. And this guy convinces the white guy to leave the KKK. And basically everywhere that he goes, he has these conversations with people because that KKK guy goes and tells his buddies of the KKK, and like there's a ripple effect with this, and a whole bunch of people end up walking away from the KKK because of this black musician who is willing to engage in the conversation and say, well, like this is, I'm no different than you are. Like, what was your perspective about me? And then what would it take to change your mind? and then as they talk about things, they realize that we've got a lot more in common than we thought. And so that causes them to rethink their stereotypes and all of their beliefs about everything and make the decision that, I really shouldn't have been involved in this white nationalists terrorist group to begin with.
But it's hard to see that, right? If you...
Yep.
How does that work? If there's a group of people that you don't know much about, you have a tendency to shy away from them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be... The way I said that, it was very racist implied, right? But it doesn't have to be race.
Yep.
I have a tendency to... You're probably the same way. If there's a group of tech nerds gathered around talking about a bunch of Microsoft computers, I have a tendency to shy away from them.
Yep. Totally. That's what I was thinking too.
It's because I know a decent amount about PCs. I don't care for, I have my other preferences. I'm comfortable on Apple computers. That's where I live. That's an uncomfortable area for me. I'm not just going to walk up and try to break the ice and try to understand what they're doing and such. That's not
I'm going to stay in my echo chamber.
Correct. It's more comfortable in my echo chamber. That applies in so many ways. It's just blown up in the race world, probably for good reason. Just having acquaintances who are very racist. It's
very
there.
Emotionally charged.
Yes, it is. And I don't want to say that it's unfounded, because I don't think it's unfounded. I just wonder about the mechanics and methods that people go about trying to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to me to be a racist in an attempt to solve racism. My brain doesn't work that way, but that seems to be a lot of what happens. At the same time, this is a weird spot for me to talk about this, because most of the time whenever I'm going to have a race conversation, I want to have that with someone who's not of the same race I am, because it forces the conversation to be a little more understanding. You and I talking about it probably isn't
that's not doing a whole lot of good. Yeah.
Anyway,
but the big takeaway from this for me is that it gives me hope, because I realize the potential that can come from a single conversation. Right. This one guy was willing to engage, and he changed the minds of multiple people who were involved in this organization that who knows how many other people they would have impacted. So it's like a domino effect, but it's an exponential domino effect where first you knock down one, then two, then four. And so you can kind of think, if you are paying attention to the stuff that's going on in the world today, well, I'm just one person. What difference can I make? You can make quite a bit of difference. You just don't realize it yet, simply by your willingness to engage in the conversation in the appropriate way. So that's the big thing for me, not just about race, but about everything here, is be willing to engage. You don't know what you don't know, right? That's kind of the whole point of this whole book. And you are never going to find out what you don't know until you start talking to some people that are different.
Yes. But you have to be willing to do that. And
yeah, which is not comfortable, especially
correct.
For
and it has to be Mike. People on both sides of the fence have to be willing to have the conversation. If I walk up to someone and I want to have a conversation about the school referendum that passed in our area a couple years ago, I was very much against it. A lot of people were for it. I felt like the school was making bad choices. My opinion is they didn't seem to care if the school made good or bad choices. This is the way this worked, right? But so many people I couldn't even have a conversation with without it. I would ask a question and I would instantly get yelling back in my face. That doesn't help anybody in this situation at all. It's I feel like you've been hurt. So now I feel like I'm trying to what has happened in your past that's kind of led you to this point? Now I feel like I'm trying to do some form of a ministry to help, because I don't know where this anger came from. So that's the difficult thing with these whole difficult conversations. How do you have them and how do you disarm them when not everyone's willing to have them in a cordial way?
Yeah. Volume is not going to win anybody.
Right. That was something you talked about earlier. Is like the whole confidence thing, right? It's like what was there was a little cartoon. It's like, what was it? Hold your expertise and listen to my confidence. Like it was something like that. It's like my confidence can overwhelm the science behind it. As long as I am saying it forcefully, it will get across and be the thing that takes hold.
Yep. Shall we move on to the next section?
Sure.
So part 3 is collective rethinking. And there are a couple chapters here. Chapter 8, charged conversations, which is kind of what we were talking about, having these difficult conversations. And really collective rethinking, though, is not person to person. This is like as a group, how do we change our minds about things? And then chapter 9, rewriting the textbook. Chapter 10, that's not the way we've always done it. I don't know exactly what I want to cover here. I feel like this could go a bunch of different ways. I guess let's start with the charged conversations section and let's talk about idea cults. Because idea cults are groups that stir up a batch of oversimplified intellectual Kool-Aid and recruit followers to serve it widely. And as I read that, I could not help but think of the hashtag Rome cult.
Yep.
We talked a little bit about that on one of your live streams. And I do think there is a little bit of room for interpretation of the word cult, but I do also agree that it is generally negative. What people think of is the Kool-Aid drinking, and that's not necessarily what it means, but it almost doesn't matter because in people's minds, that's what it means. And the hashtag Rome cult always rubbed me the wrong way when I was a part of when I was using Rome research. I was part of what do they call it? True believers, whatever. Like I paid the big sum and had the 5-year license and attended the calls and they were good. Like the community is cool and they're nice, but it is a big hurdle to get over and it would always kind of like rub me the wrong way. Not to the point, obviously, where like I completely walked away from it because of the branding, but I recognize that like it did leave like a negative taste in my mouth. And having read this, I realize that while hashtag Rome cult may not be the dictionary definition of a cult, they are definitely an idea cult. I could say that as a former member. I think they're not the only one. You mentioned like PCs versus Apple users. That would be another more palatable version for a lot of people, but same sort of thing, I think, where you just say, well, this is the right way to do things. And you're not considering or open to any of the other options. I think the big takeaway from this for me is to constantly be questioning these things. And if I recognize one of these idea cults, I really want to start to distance myself from that. That doesn't mean like I'm not listening to Mac Power users or whatever, but it means I'm going to have my eyes open when I engage with this. I think if you go into an idea cult thinking you're going to change people's minds, you're wasting your time. So you can go observe, but just know what you're getting into.
It seems like there are a lot of these out there. If you, like when you say that you're going to try to avoid them, the question is going to be, at what point is it an idea cult and at what point is it a strong opinion?
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? So there are going to be, people who share your opinion. Is that an idea cult? Like, where does that start and end? Probably up for debate. There are a number of folks now that I've been hearing from that like this app agnostic concept that I've talked about for a few months now, maybe longer than that. Going back to plain text files and staying away from the special formats and such, or the systems that lock you into it. You can't even get at the data. Rome research, like these are things that I tend to promote and push. Is that an idea cult? Because I've got a lot of people starting to follow that. And is that something I need to be cautious on? Right? So where's the line here? Do you get what and I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm just trying to work through that in my own brain.
Well, what Adam Grant would say is that if you find yourself saying blank is always good or blank is never bad, then you may be a member of an idea cult.
I would say the former, probably not the latter.
Okay. Then yeah.
There are times when I would say using plain file formats that I have control over is always good. Like I would probably say that. So does that qualify?
Would qualify then. Yeah. It's probably not as strong as some other idea cults out there, but yeah. And I think this is why there's like nuance to this, but really I want to recognize when I am in those echo chambers, basically, because I do that too. I mean, with the work that I do at the Suite Setup, I'm kind of paid to say this is the one that is always good.
This is my job to tell you, don't use anything else, use this one.
But even that has evolved over the years. If you've read any of my reviews in the last couple of years, it's kind of like, this is the one we recommend for most people because of X, Y, and Z. But if you want something that does this, then then check out this one.
Right.
Almost every review I've written over the last couple of years has been in that format where it hasn't just been a single recommendation. There is a recommendation for like most people, recognizing who most people that come to the Suite Setup are and what they're looking for. Generally, they are creative people. They want to write or something like that, and they want to become more productive. They want to have more better output, whatever that means to them, whether it's blog posts, a book, whatever. So I can go into it from that frame of reference and recognize that this is probably for that person what I would recommend, but there's always nuance to it. And the idea cult thing, the always good or never bad, that's kind of like the binary bias, I think is how he frames it, where like it's either good or it's bad. There is no gray area. There's nothing in between, and nothing is really that simple. And he makes the point that binary bias can be with your emotions as well as with issues. And I'm probably going to be very bad at this, but my goal is anyways to recognize the spectrum with all this stuff and to try to understand the perspectives of the other people who have different opinions of the different points on the spectrum.
That's fair. I think it's just something to be aware of. I would struggle to say I don't want to do this at all, because I do have some points that I think are important enough that I'll ascribe to them or promote them, create them, maybe, potentially. I don't know if this whole app agnostic thing is something I created. I don't think it is, but that concept is probably one I would stand on and say, yeah, sure. To use his definition, yeah, it's an idea cult. I just know that I've been burnt by doing other things. So I'm going to stand on it for now. But if someone can make a strong argument against that, I'm all ears. And there are places where I violate my own rules with that as well. Like I have special file formats that I use regularly for video editing and such. So there's a lot of stuff that I do that does require things outside of that. And yet I still promote plain files. I'll get off that high horse.
Which is completely fine, I think. You do want to attract your people. I mean, Funky Mosquito in the chat mentions that this is kind of tribalism. Well, Seth Godin wrote a book called Tribes, which is all about attracting and serving your tribe. So it's not all bad, I think.
Right.
At least from who are you going to help perspective, because PC users probably don't care what I have to say. But I think if we really want to land on the truth, then all we can really do is change ourselves and our perspective and be willing to see the other side. And I think the moment that you enter into these idea cults and don't recognize what you're walking into, you potentially slam the door on that sort of stuff. Like you got to tread carefully with that I think.
Right.
And
That's
then
fair.
also when it comes to these issues and things, complexity isn't necessarily a bad thing. We don't have to just make something stupid, simple, right or wrong. We can admit that there are different levels of nuance with this issue, which I guess, looking back at like the approach I've taken to the suite setup reviews recently, that's kind of what I've done, is saying, oh, it's not as simple as just pick the best task management app or pick the best email app. That's kind of why we came out with those quizzes, because there's different criteria. And I just got sick of people asking me like, okay, so which task manager should I use? And I have to ask the questions, well, like, do you want due dates and start dates? Do you want to, where do you want to access it from? That sort of thing.
Right.
And then like took my mental flow chart, and turned it into a quiz.
And it's, I want to point out, like, whenever you have things that you're recommending, like I had a person, this is within the last 2 weeks, I had a person ask me an opinion on a computer that they wanted to upgrade to.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been a fairly long time Mac user, Apple user. They were laying out kind of like what you're saying, like, what is your situation? My default is you've been a long time Mac user, obviously buy a new Mac. Like, that's easy answer in my head. But I was like, okay, well, what are you trying to do with it? And they laid out the things they're doing for work, the things that they're in the process of getting into. It's like, well, based on what you're telling me, you probably need a PC. Like, I don't want to be someone who takes someone who's an Apple user and puts you on a PC, but what you're telling me, if everything you just explained is 100% true and you're going to follow through on all of that, this is what I would recommend. And it's against what I would normally want someone to do, but you have to be willing to put everything in context, right? So it's okay. I like that you're willing to like take people down a decision tree. It's something that I have struggled with in the past. Like, don't tell me the one thing that beats all the others. Like, walk me through what works best for my situation. We had this I just did a bank of, did office hours this past Wednesday with Team Analog on Analog Joe. And one of the gentlemen who was there had some very pointed questions about a specific app that he was looking for. It's like, it really depends. And I can't tell you what the answer is because I'm not getting enough information to point you in the right direction. So yes, context is important.
That's the most frustrating thing.
Yes, if I can't get all the data, I can't make a recommendation.
You have to let me know the way that you work, and then I can recommend something.
Right.
Yeah.
Until then, I'm going to tell you grab a notebook. So here's my default answer until you give me more information to tell me otherwise.
And a fancy fountain pen.
Totally.
This kind of reminds me of something in chapter 9, the dumbstruck effect, where where Adam talks about the sage on the stage and the lecture format, which is typically what people gravitate to, but is actually really bad for actually learning. So I don't want to be that person, which is a little bit tricky because at the same time, like Toastmasters and speaking competitions and things like that, in some sense, I'm sort of working towards that. But I don't think just because you are a speaker doing like a professional, you get a professional speaking gig, whatever, you're presenting on a topic, that you have to default into this format. There are ways, I think, that you can overcome this. Michael Port does a great job of talking about this in the heroic public speaking class, because the last session in the self-paced one is a speech that he gave. It's a keynote speech. It's like an hour long. And he incorporates not just like his story and the elements of giving a good speech, but there's a huge section where the audience is mingling. Like there's audience participation, and then they come back together at the end. So I think it's easy to kind of click into like, well, this is the default format, but start looking for new and more interesting ways to mix things up, which kind of leads into the last chapter in this section. Like, that's not the way we've always done it as it pertains to lectures, presenting from slides, standing up in front of people, that's the way that we've always done it. But that doesn't mean that that's the way that we have to do it.
Right. Like whenever I give talks at our church, two things kind of talking about the sage on the stage thing. It's pretty common for people to see me. I'm the IT director at a church. I'm talking at the church about tech in some way. So it's very easy for people to project I'm the expert onto me. And I try to make sure I'm not necessarily like I know a lot and I'm probably an expert in a few very small areas, but not all of them. Like I am very far from being an expert on everything technology. That doesn't exist. So I'm very careful to point that out. Like if I get a question, like I'm going to lay that foundation there. It's like that's not always the case. So yes. But at the same time, like talking about the conventions, like whenever we get talks and stuff, like people get up, talk, you have your slides. That's what I do. And I think you're the same way. Like if I'm going to put something on the screen, it's because there's a specific image I want in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm trying to show you how something works. It's really hard to explain in words. For example, like one of the last talks I gave, I was telling the story of a new technology that had come out that people hated and really wanted to not become a big deal. It was the automobile. But I told the whole story without telling you what the technology was. And then the moment that I revealed what it was, I put the old Model T up on the screen. It was black leading up to that, but I put a Model T up because that was the one that was kind of the talking point that we were going through. I didn't want people looking at a Corvette, like a brand new C8. I didn't want that on screen. I wanted the one that was from back in the time, right? So I'm picking and choosing those very specifically because there's an image that I want to put into your brain. Another piece of that talk was talking about London taxi drivers. Like we've talked about this, right? The spatial piece of how London taxi drivers developed their brain, right?
Yeah.
I told that story, but to do that, I brought up a couple images of the most difficult intersections in London so that people could understand how difficult it is to drive in London, because most of us have not been there, right? So anyway, conventions, like, yes, you can do things in the same way, but I like to tweak what the norm is. I'm not putting words on a slide and just going to read it to you. I despise that. Please stop if you do that. But these are all any color you want as long as it's black. Good job, Michael. All of these things are things that you can tweak and use to your benefit. But at the same time, traditional ways of doing some of those things are not always great.
Yep. Let's see. Anything else from this section? I mean, there's lots of other stuff we could talk about. I guess the other thing I want to hit on here would be the judging yourself versus judging your work. There's a whole flow chart with this. And I think this hits on something we talked about with The Practice by Seth Godin. And I have had to learn over the years to separate myself from the thing that I have made. When you end up shipping something, you have essentially taken a snapshot of your thoughts on a particular topic at that moment in time. And it is difficult to disassociate your identity from the way that you used to think. But it is also very important, especially for creatives, especially if you are constantly rethinking things, be willing to say, well, that's what I used to think, but it has changed. And then the other thing kind of related to that is in chapter 10, we hear disagree but commit again, which is from the Jeff Bezos thing. Essentially what that is saying is, are you willing to gamble with me on this? And if you are willing to do that, it is an indication of the culture of the company or the organization that you are a part of. He talks in this chapter, which I thought was kind of cool, that the teams that are psychologically safe, they actually report more errors, which kind of seems contradictory because if you're psychologically safe, then you're not willing, like you're willing to admit your mistakes and get them fixed the Toyota way. Eventually you're going to iron all those things out. He makes the point, though, that they probably make much less because when you are in a psychologically safe environment, you are willing to share your errors. When you aren't in that environment, you just sweep them under the rug. So you really don't know how many errors are being made.
Right.
Which I thought was a very profound insight there.
It is interesting that if you feel comfortable in your job and such, and you feel secure, you're more willing to point out the mistakes you made or that your group is making.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're not comfortable there, like, I'm not going to point this out because I don't know that this is going to go over real well. Yeah. So it's an interesting phenomenon, I think. But it seems like, I would say probably you and I are very comfortable in our positions and as such that we could do that very comfortably. So it would be an easy thing for us to do.
I would concur. Real briefly, let's talk about the last part here, which is part 4, the conclusion. Chapter 11 is escaping tunnel vision, and then there is just like the little epilogue at the very end. But chapter 11, there's some interesting stuff in here. So he makes the point that the average person has 12 different jobs throughout their life. And he talks about identity foreclosure, which is attaching to a single identity or a fixed mindset. This reminded me a lot of the conversation about how to be everything. I can't find the specific point about when and how you make a shift. He does talk quite a bit in here about like the reviews or the checkups. And I feel like when you do a career checkup, that's the point when you realize, well, I'm on this track, but I should actually be over here on this track. And that reminded me of Emily Wapnick's, where you're going this way and then you get over here and then you go up this way and then like you go way back over here. But you're not going backwards necessarily. You're still going up. You're just moving laterally to a different line, different parallel. And I feel like this conversation in this chapter kind of helped solidify that for me. So I feel even more strongly that, yes, you should be everything.
Be willing to sidestep and keep going forward.
Yep, exactly. He also talks in this section about how our lives and identities are open systems. He defines open and closed systems. I don't really want to talk a whole lot about that because we're going to talk lots about systems in the next book.
Right.
So a teaser for the next episode.
Yep. We'll discuss how systems work. Maybe a little.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I feel like we've covered all the high points on it. There's, of course, a lot between those points that we're catching all the peaks as we drive by, right? Typical Instagram feed. So, we're catching all the high points as we're going across this one. There's a lot, again, like we were talking about earlier, as he tells these stories, there's a lot of little tidbits as he tells the story. So, yes, we're sharing these high points, but there's a lot more to it. So, yes, there's a lot in it. We could go on and on and on about this one.
All right. Do you have any action items from this book?
I plan to think again.
The cheater one.
So no, I don't. This one was hard for me. I felt like I actually tried to figure out what to do with this. And what I discovered is that I'm neck deep in selling and buying our house, like moving from one to the other. And I've been using a lot of this in that process.
Okay.
Let me think about things from a technical, scientific stance and try to get my emotions out of the mix, which is not an easy thing to do when you're talking about your house.
No.
Right? So I've been doing that quite a bit and using some of this material in the midst of conversations with my wife, with agents, with all the people involved in selling and buying houses. Like there's a lot to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been using a lot of this, and there's been a number of times where my wife and I are discussing something and I can tell she's a little more emotional about it than I am, and just like, okay, hold on, Beck. Like, think about it this way. Like, this is just a pure science stance. So I have used things in those ways, and I found that that's very helpful, but I don't know how to tell you what that action item is. Like, I haven't figured out how to articulate what that is. Does that make sense? Like, it's just hard to, like, what do I do with it? Sometimes these books, like, yeah, start doing this, stop saying this, do that. Like, sometimes it's very clear. This is telling you ways to think. So how does that materialize in the physical realm? I don't know. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, I've got two specific ones which aren't like do this, but more keep this in your repertoire for specific situations. So I mentioned the separation of identities, working with family. That's the easy example, but there are other places where you need to protect the relationship, but you also need to have this debate before in order to get any sort of resolution. So he mentions in chapter 4 the tactic of using the phrase, "Can we debate?" which I think is pretty genius, because if you're just talking to somebody, there isn't a real clear distinction that like, oh, we've left the talking as friends to talking as people with differing views and we're trying to solve a problem at church, work, whatever. And I feel like that is a very clear distinction. Like, we are transferring from this mode to this other mode, and hopefully will protect the feelings in the relationship better.
Right.
So
right.
I do want to keep that in my back pocket, I guess, and
Sure.
use that at some point. The other thing I want to do is, and this is from chapter 10, That's Not the Way We've Always Done It. I want to ask myself and others, when appropriate, how do you know? Because I feel that question is not very pointed. Like, that is not very threatening in a lot of the situations where I could envision using that. But also it forces the other person to articulate why we're just defaulting to a certain way of doing something. And again, I don't have like a specific place that I want to use that in the next 2 weeks, but
Sure.
I feel like those two are great ways. Back to my action item of expanding my vocabulary. This is more like my vocabulary for debate and disagreement.
How to start them, how to maintain them. Sure. I applaud you for that. I'm not usually one that wants to change my vocabulary. I just become aware of it, I guess. Like, if it's something I am pointed out, like, it tends to just be in the back of my mind anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm weird.
That's fair. Let's go to style and rating. I guess my book, I go first.
Yep. Good luck.
Well, we talked a little bit about my epiphany of like the stories not being as awesome as I thought they would be. I'm okay with that. I think the book itself is pretty awesome. I really like Adam Grant's style. It's entertaining. It's not a slog to get through, which a lot of like people in his position who write books like this can definitely feel that way. There was someone in the chat who had mentioned earlier that Daniel Kahneman, right? Thinking Fast and Slow. That is one of those big ideas that comes up over and over and over again, but we don't really mention it. The reason we don't really mention it, I think, is because neither of us were really excited about reading that book. And that tempered the takeaways from the book. Not that you have to really sell a really powerful idea. I get that a lot. For a lot of these people, just the act of writing it and communicating it, like that is their contribution to the world. I think a lot of people, though, in books that have been written since we read, or since that one, that have taken that concept and packaged it a little bit differently, those are the ones that have resonated with us. Like I'm thinking about the Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. They talk about the Thinking Fast and Slow at different points in there. Thinking Fast and Slow is never the one, though, that comes to our minds. I feel like Think Again could be one of those.
Right.
I feel like the way that Adam Grant communicates is really well done and makes me... it's like you had a good meal and you think about that even after you step away from the table. You think back to like, oh, that was a really great dinner. The food was great. The conversation was great. Good company, whatever. And you have fond memories of that experience. That's kind of what I'm left with this book. I also don't think I have any spots where I quoted Adam Grant because I have these different emojis that I use in my MindNote files. And I have one for like the quotes that I want to remember, and there wasn't anything like one-liner ish that totally encapsulated it outside of context that I wanted to put into my quote book, which was again a little bit alarming to me, but also I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's probably a good thing because it means everything is tied together very cohesively, because I didn't ever stumble upon one thing that I felt like, oh, I want to cherry pick that thing out of here. I do think that there are more profound, more impactful books that we have read, which is the only reason why I'm not going to rate this 5 stars. But it's really, really good. I'm really, really glad that we read it. And I do think I would recommend this to just about anybody who listens to this podcast. So I'm going to rate it at 4.5. And again, just because it doesn't feel like completely life-changing walking away from it. But I have nothing negative to say about it. And I wish it would have been longer, to be honest, even though it is 250 pages and it took me the entire 2 weeks to get through. I got done and I kind of had that disappointed feeling like, now I got to find another book to read, but I want to keep reading this one.
Yep. I'm with you. Like it's an interesting book to go through. It took me about the 3rd chapter to figure out what was going on with the stories, which was why like the very beginning of it feels very fuzzy to me. Like I couldn't quite put my finger on what was going on, but I knew it was different and I knew there was something strange about it. And I couldn't quite tell if I liked it or not because it didn't fit my normal, right? And once I discovered what he was doing, it was fine. Like I didn't struggle with that at all. But because it doesn't follow, we were talking about earlier, it doesn't follow the normal way of storytelling and then debrief after, which means that you have to approach it somewhat differently mentally. That's fine. That's not a bad thing. It just means that from a readability stance, I felt like I had to focus on it a little bit more than normal. Again, not bad, just a thing to be aware of. And as someone who is prone to distraction, this one I found I did better if I was reading it in the morning. A lot of time books I can read at night, but this one I found that I did better if I was reading it in the mornings because I was more focused at that time. So I don't really understand why all those pieces came together in that way, but it was a thing that I just want to call out. So I don't want to say it was a difficult book to read because it's not. It's just, I guess what I'm saying is it's not as easy as a lot of the others that we've covered. So if you want something that's a little more difficult, just from a readability stance, I feel like this is solid. As far as the material that he's covering, really loved it. Like there's a lot of great topics here. I think you're right in that we've covered a lot of things that maybe revolve around some of these concepts independently. They've not all been put together in this form, like in the sense of be careful what you hold as foundational thoughts in your brain. We haven't had anybody like tell you, please don't do that. Like that's a lot of what you come away from this with. So that I appreciate. So I struggle. I'm like you. I struggle to put it at the 5. I feel like I want to put it at the 5, but I shouldn't. So I'll join you at 4.5 on this one. So I will recommend this to folks. I can't say I've done that at this point, but if someone wants to have a discussion around the idea of trying to maybe challenge your own beliefs or challenge the beliefs of a collective group, this is a solid one to go to. Just be ready for things to be a little bit different as far as style goes. That's, I think, the point I'm trying to get across. So anyway, 4.5.
Awesome. So let's put this one on the shelf. What's next, Joe Bulig?
Work the System, Sam Carpenter. This one has come up a number of times by you, I think. I feel like you've brought this one up a handful of times over a number of episodes. I'm not going to be able to place how many and such, but I feel like we need to cover this one. For the number of times that we've talked about systems and the number of times that we've belabored systems and argued against them and told them, like, that won't work. Like, how many times have we done this? I feel like we need to read a system book about the system. So here we go. 118. It'll be Work the System, Sam Carpenter. And then what are we doing after that, Mike?
Another new book, which is actually not out yet as we record this, but we both really enjoyed Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And he has a new book coming out April 27th, Amazon says, called Effortless. And I think this is going to be a fun one. I pre-ordered this, and he and his wife co-presented an Effortless webinar, which I watched the other day. And I feel like this one could go one of two directions. This could either be a vast departure from Essentialism, which I don't really anticipate, but it could feel sort of like a bait and switch, because Essentialism is so focused on like pick the right things, and now we're going to be focusing on it, I think, sort of the efficiency aspect of that. But I expect it to be done in a way where it actually just like doubles down on the Essentialism message.
Sure.
Which that I'm not quite sure what that ends up being. I've kind of seen these as like two polar opposites in the productivity world for a very long time. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one.
Yeah, I think it'll be a fun one. Mosquito's saying that he downloaded Work the System from their website and has been spammed. Pretty much all of those will operate that way, but it doesn't surprise me. Probably a ding against it to begin with, though.
Yeah, that is a good point, though. We should call that out. If people do want to read this, you can download the entire book for free from the website in a PDF form. In the show notes, I always include the Amazon links because I prefer the physical books, and I have bought Work the System. It is on my bookshelf back here. So that one will be in the show notes, but if you want to download it for free from the website, you can do that too at workthesystem.com.
Yep.
Just know you're going to get pitched.
It's what happens with free stuff.
You got any Gap books?
I don't, because, selling a house takes time, Mike. I barely got through this one. So
That it does.
I haven't started Work the System yet. I'll be honest, I think it's going to be tight for me to get that one done in 2 weeks. So
Sure.
No, I'm not even going to attempt it this time around.
All right.
You?
I don't have one on here, but I do have to take the walk of shame and admit that I still have not finished The Road Less Stupid. So I do have a sabbatical coming up, and I will try to finish that one along with Work the System. I think I will be able to do that, but I'm not picking a Gap book until I get through that one.
Yeah, good call. Good call.
All right, so thanks everyone for listening. Thank you to the people who have joined us live. Thank you specifically to the Bookworm Premium Club members who are willing to support the show financially, help us keep the lights on. If you go to bookworm.fm/membership, you can sign up for $5 a month, and you will get access to all of my MindNode files from the books that we've read. You'll get access to a couple secret sections on the Bookworm Club, and you will get access to a wallpaper that I designed and a couple of extra things like some Gap Book episodes that Joe had recorded back in the day. So if you would like to support the show, you can do that at bookworm.fm/membership.
And we'd love to have you there. So if you're reading along with us, pick up Work the System by Sam Carpenter. Read through that. We'll discuss it in a couple weeks.